Ms. Desjardins. There you are. Uh-oh, you're bringing your computer up there, too.
There's something I wanted to read from. The statute that...
Could you identify yourself for the record?
My name is Deirdre Desjardins, and I'm with California Water Research. The statute that authorized the creation of the council also abolished the Bay Delta Authority that was the administrative agent and agency for CalFed and the lead agency for implementation of the science component of CalFed. And the statute gave the Delta Stewardship Council all of the authorities and responsibilities of the Bay Delta Authority. Reason I'm bringing this up with respect to the salinity is that there is an existing goal that is part of the CEQA commitment for CalFed. I'm going to read that to you. Improve and or maintain water and sediment quality conditions that fully support healthy and diverse aquatic ecosystems in the Bay Delta estuary and watershed, and eliminate to the extent possible toxic impacts to aquatic organisms, wildlife, and people. Objective 1, reduce the loadings and concentration of toxic contaminants in all aquatic environments in the Bay Delta estuary and watershed to levels that do not adversely affect aquatic organisms, wildlife, and human health. Objective 2, reduce loadings of oxygen-depleting substances from human activities into aquatic ecosystems in the Bay Delta estuary and watershed to levels that do not cause adverse ecological effects. Objective 3, reduce fine sediment loadings from human activities into rivers and streams to levels that do not cause adverse ecological effects. And I'm raising the question here, since the Council is not considering these goals or the commitments at all in this letter, does this constitute an abandonment by the state of a commitment to work towards these goals and realize them?
Mr. Stevens.
As you know, the Delta Reform Act did establish the council, and that's the important first point, and it gave it a clear mission, which was to adopt a Delta plan and set out the components of what should be in the Delta plan. And that's what the council is doing right now. The overriding mission is to come up with a Delta plan that furthers the achievement of the co-equal goals. And that's the primary mission. There is no intent to abandon any issues that potentially can get us to achievement of the co-equal goals. The Delta Reform Act says that we should first look towards the Delta Vision strategic report for strategies and objectives, and thereafter go forward with putting together a plan that satisfies the statute. So the statute talks about the Delta Stewardship Council as being a successor to the Bay Delta Authority with regard to the administrative obligations, which it is. Part of CalFed does live on. I mean, many stakeholders have said that CalFed is dead. Others are quick to point out that parts of CalFed live. For instance, the Department of Fish and Game is currently implementing what was called the CalFed Ecosystem Restoration Program. In fact, the chair, you referred to a cross-cut budget that came out. We had a big binder full of ongoing CalFed projects. The CalFed surface storage studies live on under a different name. The federal agencies are still engaged in some CalFed projects. So CalFed has not gone away. The record of decision under CalFed was exactly what the state and federal agencies had claimed all along, and it was a roadmap to help them coordinate their ongoing and anticipated actions. They had a whole bunch of goals and objectives, strategies. Instead of co-equal goals, they had 4 objectives. It was a roadmap. It was not legally binding with regard to the amount, the timing, the particulars of projects. It was clear with respect to qualifications that it was subject to allocation of resources by both the federal and state governments. The project changed, and because the project changed, the whole Delta water management system evolved. We are now in an evolved system where we've gone through a reevaluation through the legislative process. We now have a new legislative scheme, which is clear in setting up this body, and it's clear that your mission is to adopt a Delta plan that furthers the achievement of the co-equal goals. So CalFed hasn't gone away. There are some elements that are still ongoing with other agencies, but your mission is to comply with the Delta Reform Act.
I guess what I want to say is, in this and also in the salinity policies in the Delta Plan, there wasn't any reference to the existing commitment. The Secretary of Natural Resources was signatory to that agreement, and you are now the agency within the Natural Resources Division that is responsible for keeping the commitments in that signed agreement to some extent, and particularly with respect to the goals and objectives, which are now... There was also a commitment to adaptive management, but to the extent that you're changing the goals in CalFed, and for example, going from maintaining water quality in the Delta to perhaps allowing increased salinity, you really need to look at the consequences of that change, and as a CEQA issue,
Well,
look at the policies.
Are these comments you've made either on comments on the Delta Plan in writing or on the EIR?
There are extensive comments on the Delta Plan.
No, but I mean the point you're making now.
This is with respect to the letter that you're writing. And
Mr. Stevens, why don't you just do this? Make a note of this issue. I don't think we're able to answer questions here about the legal viability of a CalFed program, part of which still exists and part of which doesn't at this time. But let our lawyer take a look at that issue.
I wanted to raise the issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wallace from EBMUD. Mr. Wallace.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council.
Doug, make it all clear, would you?
Doug Wallace here, bringing nothing but brevity. Or as Robert Reich would say, let me be short. I think I have the advantage of the discussion and explanation from staff about why these criteria were included. I would like to suggest that maybe temperature should be included among the factors that should be recommended for the state board's attention. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Pat, are those all the comments? Okay. Well, Mr. Grindstaff, this will give you an indication of how fast our progress is going to be through the rest of this agenda.
Let's hope we go faster in the future. You wanted a summary of what I have heard and what we should do. How about if I summarize what I propose to do based on this? First of all, I think I want to do a draft letter. I think it should be sure and talk about the co-equal goals, a holistic approach. I think it's entirely appropriate that we recommend workshops to the state board. I also think it's appropriate that we point out best available science, and I actually like Doug's suggestion about temperature, and I want to go back through my notes and Mark's notes about all of the other issues that should potentially be brought to the attention of the state board. I want to think about the limits and how we would limit what we're talking about with regard to more natural flow regime, because that's a serious subject that deserves some thought, because clearly we are not saying just go with, I think I heard from Greg Gartrell some assumption that a more natural flow regime although he pointed out it's different than actually just saying unimpaired flows. So I want to make sure that we clarify we're not saying unimpaired flows. We're saying a more natural flow regime because that's what the science says, and that is flows that work for species. I want to be sure that we talk about the fact that you have to balance the interest to make sure that nobody can misinterpret what we're saying as forgetting the responsibilities of the state board to balance all of the interests and look at all of the other objectives, the basin plan objectives. And so all of that needs to go into the letter. I think that means that it will be a longer letter rather than a shorter letter. In the end, the thing that I think most relates to what the council's core responsibility is to point out the science. And I would really like to point out, in particular, this new report that just came out that has many, many different references to flows and impacts of flows in many different ways. And I think that would be important. I think it's important also to say that over the long term, as I said, that more natural flow regime, what is it we're talking about? Clearly, we're not talking about letting reservoirs go to dead pool level. And so I think we need to make it clear that's not what we're saying, although I guess inherently I understand that, but probably saying it in writing is a useful thing. And with that, I think then circulating it to the chair and vice chair, and maybe if you would like one other member, so that we don't violate Bagley-Keene, would be useful. And from there, send the letter.
Joe, can you explain the holistic approach?
Yeah, the holistic approach means that you cannot look at just flow because just flow does not solve the problem. And when you look at flows, you have to look at what the impacts of flows are on the other problems and the other stressors, if you will, the impacts of those other stressors on flows. And they are clearly, they work together. And it is impossible to achieve the co-equal goals just by looking at flows, and inappropriate to achieve the co-equal goals just doing that if you could. And I don't think you can. And so we need to talk about all of the other things. If you look at the National Academy's report, you look at our own Delta plan, other things that the council's done in the past, I think we need to point some of the other things out that are truly important as we move ahead.
Joe, let me just weigh in on this. I feel comfortable with the approach we've taken now for 2 years of not trying to write our own flow standards. I might personally have a preference to do it if left to my own devices, but we've decided not to, and I think for good reason. The statute retained the authority of the Water Board on this issue, didn't grant it to us. I think there is no good reason for us to go and try to prejudge that issue, just as we've been very careful to avoid prejudging the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, which is unique and different because it comes to us as a potential appeal or aspect of it. So using the kind of conventional approach that virtually all agencies use of pointing out an area that is worthy of the attention of the lead agency, that's the approach I like. Here's an issue. Not telling it, oh, by the way, this is miles more important than anything else you're considering, or it should be considered but ignored. I don't want to do that. I think it's just, this is a much more conventional kind of activity. Randy described what these comments were way back when we started off, and that's the way I'd like, I think the issue is raised. What do you think that they should consider, that they might not be considered? Are there any other aspects around that are not mentioned in the notice of preparation? Pretty straightforward in my judgment. Not an advocacy document, but a straightforward, just raising the questions and letting them review them.
I think it's rather clear that the comments you've heard today at least have kind of pointed to the discussion after the report was written. So I think some of the things may have been worked out, but I suggest that you still meet with some of the key stakeholders to make sure that all of those points, as much as you can be incorporated based on the direction from the council members. Because I know there were some other areas that you and I talked about. I think, Phil, also that you felt could be included. And I assume that that draft will be sent to the chair and the vice chair for their review.
Yes, and I'll be glad to talk to the stakeholders. This is not a guarantee that every stakeholder will be happy.
Oh, I know, but I'm just
Okay.
saying, based on the key things you've heard today, because I think a lot of clarity had to do with a lot of concerns we're trying to clarify issues. And so I think some of those issues can be worked out. So if you would just meet
Agreed.
with
And
them.
I'm hopeful I actually have a meeting with some of those stakeholders a week from tomorrow, so maybe I can deal with some
And
of
look
this.
at the report, the
Yeah.
two-page report. Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Don.
Yeah, just picking on one of the things that Greg Archell said, though, was about the other entities that have some role in this, and he mentioned Fish and Game and a couple of others. I didn't get the note on who all they were. I'm just wondering, too, that as a part of any communication, that beyond the role of the water board to do this, though, I think that, again, I think it's appropriate certainly for this council in many, if not most instances, to encourage that, because again, that goes back to some of the structural issues of how things are determined, and sometimes in the absence of other either information and or considerations, even amongst the agencies. And so I think that's an important aspect that maybe ought to be considered, because I think it's something, again, we can encourage strongly and should, that not just to work on their silo of their responsibilities, which is a big one, but to take those into account. And just by noticing other entities and getting their comments, that's one way of doing it, but that's a pretty structured way. And I think that maybe the structure needs to have a more institutional movement towards folks working not just collaboratively, but I think taking those things into account, because if they do it in the absence of some of that other information, it may not be a wrong decision, but I think it may be devoid or less robust than it could be if it had other entities as a part of that. So I guess I would just offer that as a thought, and it kind of came out with some of the suggestions that Mr. Gartrell made.
Okay. Anything else?